international, and it could mean espionage investigation against Eric Swalwell. I'm not saying that's the case, but it is possible, right?
Yeah, it would have to be a federal offense. So it could be anything from a very serious offense like that. It could be something related to campaign finance violations. We
Right.
don't know what it is right now. So I think we have to let the investigation play out.
Our listener producer Eric posts on our Dial Interactive board, courtesy of Meineke, doing car care right. Why do we see so many repeat offenders in the system? Are judges more lenient these days? Well, the three strikes laws have been pretty much thrown out, right, Zach?
Well, there's good news and bad news. And if your
All right.
listeners are interested, I talk about this on my Instagram and YouTube. That's at Zack on Law, at ZACK on Law. You can find me
Okay.
on X at TZ Smith as well. But look, one of the issues that's been plaguing places like New York and Chicago, they have very lenient bail laws, where essentially they've made it almost impossible for judges to hold those who pose a danger to themselves or their communities. That's a very real issue. In terms of the three strikes laws, in California, for example, those laws are still on the books. They're very effective when they're applied, but when you have rogue prosecutors in office who are charging crimes in a way to avoid triggering those three strikes laws, that
Right.
certainly plays into it as well.
And three strikes laws have been categorized in some circles as racist, right?
Yeah, look, this is part of the effort by the radical left to argue that our entire criminal justice system is systemically racist. Many of those same people advocate for the abolition of prisons. And so these laws are not racist. They are actually very effective in deterring repeat offenders from committing further crimes.
Earlier this week, Zach, another police officer was arrested in South Carolina for illegally accessing flock traffic camera data. She was apparently trying to keep dibs on her boyfriend's whereabouts and so forth. This is not the first time it's happened. We've heard about a bunch of these. Should the public be concerned, in your estimation?
Well, look, this is new technology. It is very transformative in a lot of ways in terms of how it can track people, the level of detail it can track people. And with that new technology come pros and cons. To your point, there are stories of abuses of this technology. I think many Americans are rightly inherently skeptical of being able to track with this degree of certainty. On the flip side, these cameras have proved vital in solving some very violent crimes and helping finding missing children, elderly individuals. And so I think the debate right now is really focused on what are the appropriate guardrails for this technology? Should warrants be required to access the data these cameras produce, like it is
Well,
for
the
cell
Constitution
data?
says it should, right? Doesn't the Constitution indicate that
Well, there's
a
debate, right?
warrant signed by a judge? What do you think, Zach?
Well, there's a debate right now because this
Yeah,
same issue came up with cell towers, right? Whenever you get this aggregation of data, ordinarily you don't have a right to privacy, an expectation of privacy when you're in a public place. And so, for example, that's why police officers can follow you. They can track your movements in public without a warrant. You don't have an expectation of privacy. But the
interesting.
question the court is going to have to confront is when you get this aggregation of data that really transforms it into something different entirely, whether that transforms the nature of the information so that a warrant would be required.
So, what kind of a debate do you believe, Zach, is needed with respect to the gathering of all this data?
Yeah, the discussion we're having right now about a warrant requirement, when it's needed, whether it's needed, the guardrails that are put in place, I think those are the issues the court is going to have to confront. Look, license plate readers have been used by police officers and law enforcement agencies for many, many years. But the differential with these flock cameras is one, their prevalence in communities, they're far more prevalent than license plate readers were before. And with the advent of AI, Flock is able to aggregate this data, map the patterns and practices of individuals to a far more granular degree than has ever been possible.
One of our listener producers, Flyboy, just posted in the Dial Lounge, courtesy of Meineke doing car care right. Police are supposed to have a warrant to access cell tower data.
Right.
Well, that's true. So, what's different between a cell tower data and the data that a flock system is gathering, in your estimation, Zach?
Well, in the cell tower data, one of the differentials is that essentially the argument was you're turning that information over to a third party, your cell phone carrier, when you're doing that.
Ah, okay. All right.
And so that is one of the factors that played into this. Again, the argument Flock would make, I think, is this is no different than you're driving on a public road. If a private security camera captures you, if one of the traffic cameras captures you as you're driving down the road. Now, the privacy advocates, they would argue that this aggregation of the data, that is the differentiating factor. And I think that is the issue courts are going to have to confront in terms of these Flock cameras.
Supporters of President Trump feel that lawfare is now being waged against he and his administration from Obama and Biden appointed judges. You've been a part of the system. How do you see it?
Well, undoubtedly, federal district court judges have routinely been overstepping their authority. That's why you've seen the Trump administration have to go to the U.S. Supreme Court on an emergency basis so often. And I think what's frustrating to the Trump administration and really frustrating to anyone who believes in the rule of law is you've seen these same judges repeatedly stymie, essentially ignoring the Supreme Court's directives. And I think at some point, that's why you're seeing conversations in the House about impeachment. That's why you're seeing conversations about stripping jurisdiction from some of these judges. And unfortunately,
Have you ever heard that before, Zach? In your career in law?
Some, but not to this degree. And so I think there are very real conversations that we are going to have about how do we address what happens when a judge repeatedly ignores what the law clearly dictates.
And what the Supreme Court, the decision the Supreme Court has rendered. Right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Other than Todd Blanche and Judge Janine, no other assistant U.S. attorney, to my knowledge, has had as much as a meeting with the Senate Judiciary Committee, much less a confirmation hearing. How do you feel about this? And one of those was the assistant U.S. attorney from Delaware, a close personal friend of mine who I'm having lunch with tomorrow. She couldn't even get a sit down with the Senate Judiciary Committee. She got, unfortunately, it got to the point where she had to resign. President Trump's people that he selected to be a part of his Department of Justice can't even get a hearing, can't even get a meeting with the Senate Judiciary Committee. As someone who's been a part of the Department of Justice, what do you think about that, Zach?
Yeah, look, it makes it more difficult for the day in and day out operations of the department to function. The real issue you're seeing, particularly with terms of the U.S. attorneys, is there's a very odd statute that allows federal district court judges, some of these same judges who are ignoring the Supreme Court's ruling, ruling against the Trump administration, to appoint the U.S. attorney.
It happened with Alina Habba, right, in New Jersey.
Alina Habba, you're seeing this play out in Washington, the state of Washington right now as well. And so I think, from my view, that seems to be a very problematic statute, to put it mildly, where you can have judges appointing executive branch officials. And so I'd say stay tuned on that front because I suspect we're going to see more action with regards to that.
Well, what kind of action could we see? Give us a couple of scenarios, Zach, that we might see.
Well, I'll go back to the example in Washington State. The court-appointed U.S. attorney there is suing to get his job back because as soon as he was appointed, the Trump administration, rightly, I think, fired him and said, no, you're not who we want. We want a different appointee to take that seat. And so he's suing. And so courts are going to have to resolve this issue. And I suspect this may eventually make its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court to determine who actually controls the executive branch of government. Is it the president or is it these unelected, life-tenured federal district court judges?
Zach, that is absolutely amazing that the Supreme Court should have to do this. But you're right. These district judges have gotten involved. It's become a highly political process. Sadly, justice in our country has been politicized. And for someone who believes in law and order, who has been involved in the Department of Justice, that's got to be frustrating for you, not only to experience, but also to see, right?
No. Absolutely. And look, I think it should be frustrating to any American, whether you like Donald Trump, whether you dislike Donald Trump. Look, we have rules and procedures. The Constitution dictates who gets to control the executive branch. And so whenever you see anyone trying to subvert that process, but particularly when you see federal judges essentially ignoring the dictates of the Constitution, that is a very troubling thing indeed.
Well, we are going to probably see more of this lawfare, that I call it, with the federal judges, and more of these problems heading into the next year. Certainly, depending on what happens with the midterms, it could get even worse, right?
I think that's right. And look, one of the aspects of this lawfare that's particularly concerning to me as a lawyer is the
Yep.
warfare that the left is waging. In fact, we saw this earlier this week. A group of 128 retired former federal and state judges, they filed a bar complaint, a Florida bar complaint against the Department of Homeland Security General Counsel because he had the audacity to criticize some of these judges for their legally incorrect rulings. And we saw this with John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, Jeff
Right.
Flake. This ability to strip lawyers who represent President Trump or work for the federal government of their ability to earn a livelihood. So that is a very dangerous escalation as well.
One of our listener producers, Timber Cruiser, says in the Dial Lounge, the federal district court judges have been smacked down by the Supreme Court, but they totally ignore that ruling.
Right.
It's time to impeach these judges and remove them. What do you say to that, Zach?
I think that's why you're having that conversation in the House of Representatives right now. Now, keep in mind the bar for impeachment is very high, but I think it's a good thing that we're at least having the conversation.